My name is Emily Carter, and all I wanted was to give my son Jonah a good memory for his 7th birthday. Just one good day, 7 years old. It felt important, like a small marker in a hard life. And after everything we'd been through, I promised myself I'd do this right. So I spent days planning his Minecraft-themed party at the little community center down the road. I stayed up late every night that week, cutting tiny sugar blocks and hand-shaping a creeper cake out of green fondant. My kitchen looked like a baking war zone, but I didn't care. Jonah loved Minecraft. It was all he talked about for months. When the day came, I was exhausted, but happy. I could almost picture it going smoothly, a happy crowd, some cupcakes, kids laughing while building foam pickaxes and trading Minecraft stickers. But then my sister Vanessa walked in. Late, of course. Always late. Wearing oversized designer sunglasses inside naturally and holding a pristine white cake box from some overpriced bakery downtown. The moment I saw her smirk, I knew this day wasn't going to end the way I'd hoped. "Relax, Em," she drawled, setting her box down right next to my painstakingly handmade cake. "I brought a real cake. Didn't want Jonah eating whatever that is." My mother chuckled. "Vanessa's always had a creative touch," she said, swirling a cheap glass of Chardonnay. Then she added that phrase I'd heard too many times growing up, "Bless your heart, Emily. Yours looks homemade." Their laughter cut me, but I kept my mouth shut for Jonah's sake. He didn't notice the tension. He ran straight to his glamorous aunt and eyed her cake box with innocent excitement. Vanessa flipped the lid open with a flourish. The cake looked elegant, smooth white frosting, a border of blue piping, and delicate plastic candles sticking out. Jonah clapped genuinely excited, and then she cut him a slice. I smelled it before he even took a bite. It hit me sharp and foul. Dog food. There was actual dog food layered between the frosting and the sponge cake. My stomach dropped. Jonah bit into it, froze, then spit it out, his little face twisting with confusion and shame as laughter erupted. Not from his friends. No, they looked horrified. It was our family laughing. My parents, Vanessa's 2 smug friends who followed her around like shadows. And worst of all, my father stood there filming the whole thing on his phone. Jonah's eyes filled with tears. His chin trembled as he looked around for some kind of explanation. My sweet, trusting boy wondering why everyone was laughing at him on his birthday. "He's so sensitive," Vanessa giggled. "It's just a joke, he'll survive." "You baby him too much," my mother scolded me, her voice dripping with judgment. "Boys have to toughen up. Life's hard. Better he learns it early." I didn't say a word. I just picked Jonah up, his tiny body shaking frosting smeared on his cheek and his shirt, and carried him straight out the door. Nobody followed us. Not one person. They stayed behind, ate the expensive cake, kept drinking their wine, continued the party as though Jonah and I were disposable. That night, after Jonah finally cried himself to sleep, curled up against me like he had when he was a baby, I stared at the ceiling for hours. My jaw ached from how tightly I'd been clenching it. I didn't think of revenge that night. I just thought about peace, about walking away, about cutting my entire family off and never looking back. But fate had other plans. The next morning, I remembered something. 2 weeks earlier, Vanessa had begged me for a ride to an upscale spa on the other side of town. I'd said yes because, well, I still did that back then. Said yes even when I shouldn't. After I dropped her off, I'd found a manila folder left in my glove compartment. I'd shoved it in my junk drawer, meaning to give it back. I pulled it out now. When I opened it, everything changed. Inside was a signed contract. Vanessa had taken out a $70,000 business loan using my name. My stomach twisted into knots as I flipped through the documents. Forged pay stubs, falsified bank statements, a fake LLC registration, all tied to me. Vanessa thought I'd never find it. She thought I was too tired, too beaten down, too busy being a single mom to notice. But that was her mistake. Right there, something inside me shifted. They thought I was weak. They thought they could humiliate my child and there'd be no consequences. They were wrong. That day, I dressed Jonah for school, kissed him on the forehead, and watched as he disappeared into the therapy room his counselor had kindly opened early for us. Then I went to work, not my job at the boutique I managed, but the work that would change everything. First, I made color copies of every page of Vanessa's folder. Then I walked into my local bank holding Jonah's small hand, my voice calm but firm, and laid those documents down in front of the branch manager. By the time I left, the bank's fraud department was already investigating. They assured me I wouldn't be held responsible. But Vanessa was about to learn a very hard lesson about fraud. Yet that alone didn't feel like enough. The sound of my parents laughing as my son cried haunted me. So I started making calls. Quiet ones. I reached out to an old friend who used to room with Vanessa in college, a graphic designer she'd stiffed on a big payment. I called the owner of a bakery Vanessa had publicly trashed online for ruining a wedding cake. I even tracked down her ex-fiancé, Chris, the one my parents still whispered about in hushed tones, calling him abusive. Only he wasn't abusive. He'd been undergoing chemo when Vanessa drained his savings and walked out on him. Piece by piece, I gathered stories and receipts. Then came the perfect opportunity. Vanessa's fiancé, Daniel, a well-connected investment broker from an old money family, was throwing an elegant engagement brunch at his parents' country estate. Vanessa had spent months crafting the perfect image for them: successful, kind-hearted, family-oriented. She'd sold them the lie that she was the ideal future daughter-in-law. And so I sent her a little engagement gift. Inside the gift box was a single framed photo, a still frame from Jonah's birthday party. In the picture, Jonah was crying, frosting streaked on his face, while Vanessa laughed mid-bite, holding a forkful of that disgusting dog food cake. No note, no explanation, just that image. Vanessa's panic began immediately. 4 missed calls in an hour. A string of furious texts. You're sick. You're ruining my life. What's wrong with you? I ignored them all, because I wasn't done yet. At that brunch, Vanessa had no idea I'd already met Daniel's parents. 1 week earlier, at a charity event, I'd casually introduced myself as Emily Carter, Vanessa's sister. We'd chatted over canapes. I'd made polite conversation. And then I'd slipped them a beautifully printed pamphlet. It looked like a glossy event menu, but inside was a detailed list of every business Vanessa had scammed, complete with screenshots of complaints from the Better Business Bureau, and a copy of the loan paperwork she'd forged in my name. By the time Vanessa arrived at her engagement brunch in a designer dress, hair perfectly curled, not a single guest remained. Daniel's parents had quietly canceled everything. Vanessa's life was unraveling, and I was just getting started. After that disastrous brunch, Vanessa's mask finally cracked, but not in the way I expected. For years, she'd operated with this cruel precision, manipulating our parents' affections, turning my failures into family entertainment, twisting every encounter so she remained untouchable. Even when she slipped up, she always found a way to spin it. But not this time. The cracks widened fast. Within 48 hours, Daniel called off the engagement. His parents made it clear their family wanted nothing more to do with the future Mrs. Brandt, and by the end of the week, Vanessa's carefully curated social life was splintering. Friends who once hung on her every story began distancing themselves quietly, blocking her on socials, declining her calls, some likely afraid that her scandal would splash onto their lives. She still hadn't grasped the scale of what I had set in motion. I wasn't acting out of petty spite. I wasn't burning down her world just to watch it collapse. No, what I was doing was deliberate. A quiet reclamation of dignity, a reminder that humiliating my son would come with consequences far beyond a ruined birthday cake. But Vanessa, well, she never did learn subtlety. Instead of laying low or reflecting, she doubled down, returning to the one place where she always thought she was safe, our parents' home. And predictably, our parents welcomed her back with open arms. My mother, ever the enabler, began spinning a fresh narrative. According to her, poor Vanessa was a victim of jealous sabotage, that someone out there clearly hinting at me was determined to destroy her future out of resentment. They didn't know I'd been the one to quietly plant the seeds, but I suspected they had their suspicions, and that's what made their whispered condemnations sting all the more. Still, I stayed silent. Not out of guilt, but strategy. I needed them to keep underestimating me. Meanwhile, Jonah was starting to recover little by little. The nightmares that followed his birthday began fading, and he was rediscovering small joys: an impromptu afternoon at the park, a makeshift fort in the living room laughter over popcorn and old cartoons. That laughter, honest and unguarded, became a symbol for me. Every giggle from Jonah was like a victory bell marking my slow, steady progress toward reclaiming peace. But peace wasn't Vanessa's style. About 2 weeks after her world imploded, a letter arrived at my apartment, hand-delivered by courier no less. Inside was a formal notice Vanessa was threatening legal action. Her claim that I had intentionally and maliciously inflicted emotional distress, causing material harm to her reputation and future opportunities. I laughed when I read it at first. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was Vanessa's last desperate gamble. She didn't just want to defend herself. She wanted to punish me for stepping out of my designated role as the family scapegoat. It wasn't about winning in court. It was about dragging me back into the old dynamic where she dictated the terms and I stayed quiet and small. For a moment, I almost fell for it. I almost picked up the phone to call her to hash it out, to play mediator just like I always did. But then I stopped myself and looked at Jonah playing quietly on the floor, and something hardened inside me. No more. If she wanted a war, I would fight on my terms. I called my lawyer the next morning, a woman named Sandra Sharp, efficient, with the kind of no-nonsense energy that made me trust her instantly. I explained everything, laid out the documents. I had the fraud evidence, the screenshots, the texts Vanessa had sent in her moments of panic. Sandra smiled a small, almost predatory smile and said simply, "Oh, honey, this isn't going to go the way she thinks." Within days, Sandra filed a countersuit, not just a defense, but a formal complaint to the state's fraud division, outlining every illegal step Vanessa had taken to secure that $70,000 loan. We included everything: forged signatures, false employment records, fabricated tax filings. If Vanessa wanted a courtroom showdown, she was going to get it. But it wouldn't end the way she imagined. The symbolism wasn't lost on me either. Vanessa tried to use the legal system as a weapon of intimidation, but now that very system would become my ally, my shield, my sword. Even as I moved forward with the legal response, I didn't neglect the social battlefield. Quietly, strategically, I reached out to some of the same people Vanessa had once belittled. Miss Helen from the bakery she'd smeared online, for instance, when I showed her the footage of Jonah's ruined birthday. She didn't say much, but the tears in her eyes told me everything. That weekend, she insisted on baking a new cake for Jonah, refusing payment, decorating her little shop in Minecraft colors just for him. That gesture carried weight, not just for Jonah, but for me too. It symbolized something deeper than kindness. It was a quiet act of community solidarity, a collective rejection of the cruelty my family had normalized for so long. Then came an unexpected twist, one that even I hadn't anticipated. Vanessa, desperate to reclaim some scrap of credibility, began applying for jobs again, but this time she set her sights on a role that shocked me: guidance counselor at the very elementary school Jonah would soon attend. The audacity stunned me. The same woman who thought it was funny to serve a crying child dog food was applying to guide other children. That couldn't stand. I didn't lash out publicly. I didn't post on social media or call up the school board screaming. Instead, I sent a single email to the head of the hiring committee. No rant, no accusations, just one simple audio clip attached to a polite note that read, "This was recorded during a family birthday party for my child." I thought it might be of interest given the position Ms. Carter applied for. The audio spoke for itself. Vanessa's voice laughing, "Oh, come on, it's just a joke, he'll get over it." My mother's voice egging her on. "Film it." This is gold laughter. So much laughter. The next day, the school quietly rescinded Vanessa's interview offer. Another door closed for her, another consequence delivered not with noise or theatrics, but with precision. And when she found out, she snapped. Vanessa showed up outside my work the very next afternoon. Her usual poise was gone. Her hair was disheveled, her sunglasses missing, her expression twisted in fury. She screamed at me on the sidewalk, drawing stares from pedestrians and coworkers alike. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her directly. Instead, the building's security guard, a young man I recognized instantly as Miss Helen's nephew, stepped forward calmly. He didn't yell. He didn't touch her. He simply escorted her away, speaking just loudly enough for everyone to hear. You mess with someone's child, you shouldn't be surprised when the whole community shuts the door on you. That moment felt symbolic too. For years, I'd fought for space, for dignity, for recognition that my family refused to give me. And here, at last, a stranger, a member of my chosen community, had stood up and spoken the words I'd longed to hear. After that, Vanessa vanished. Rumor had it she'd left town entirely, moving in with a distant cousin 2 states away. She deleted her social media accounts, disconnected her number, and faded into the kind of quiet obscurity she once mocked me for living in. My parents, unsurprisingly, didn't learn a thing from the ordeal. They sent a single letter 3 weeks later, a birthday card for Jonah, with a crumpled $5 bill inside, and a note that read, "You're still family. Don't punish us forever." Jonah didn't even ask who it was from. He tore it up without a word and looked up at me with a grin. "Do we still get pizza today, Mom?" he asked. And in that moment, I smiled too, a real deep, genuine smile. "Extra cheese, kiddo," I told him, because that was the real victory, not revenge, not public humiliation, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing I didn't just win, I rebuilt something they couldn't touch. And yet, as much as that moment felt like closure, I sensed one final twist was still waiting around the corner. My parents weren't done yet. They never were. The next chapter would come quietly, unexpectedly, just as I began to think the story was over. But that, as they say, is a story for another day. I wish I could say that after Vanessa left town and my parents retreated into their usual passive-aggressive silence, life finally felt simple. It didn't. It felt quiet, yes, but not simple. Because beneath that quiet lived an uncomfortable truth: I wasn't done. Not really. The part of me that wanted peace, that wanted to simply bake cakes for Jonah and take him to school, kept bumping up against something deeper, a realization that this family war wasn't just about Vanessa. It was about everything that had shaped me to this point. The way my parents raised us, the constant comparison, the casual cruelty disguised as tradition, the whispered lectures about not airing family laundry in public, that poisonous belief that family means unconditional tolerance no matter what harm is done. That's the legacy I didn't want to pass on to Jonah. It was a Saturday afternoon, a few months after Vanessa disappeared, that the next blow landed. A letter arrived. Not a casual card this time, but a thick envelope, formal and stiff, with my parents' address in the corner and a return address I didn't recognize, a law firm in the city. My fingers trembled as I opened it, not from fear, but from anger I hadn't even processed yet. Inside, a notification that my parents were contesting the terms of my late grandmother's estate, a trust that had long been dormant and that I barely remembered. But apparently, in her original will, my grandmother had intended to leave a small plot of land near the lake to her first granddaughter, which was me. Now, conveniently, my parents had decided I was no longer worthy of that inheritance, claiming estrangement and disharmony as justification. Their lawyer's tone was polite, almost cordial, as if suggesting this was nothing more than a formality, an administrative correction to account for my supposed departure from the family. It was a message disguised as legal jargon. "You think you're free of us? You're not. You'll never be free." And that's when I made my decision. For years, I'd been playing defense, responding to their provocations, protecting Jonah, quietly countering their attacks. But this was different. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what kind of example I would set for Jonah. Was I going to teach him to quietly endure, or was I going to show him what it looks like to take back power on your own terms? So I took a risk, a calculated one, but a risk nonetheless. I decided not to wait for their legal maneuvering to play out in some sterile court hearing. I went to the old house near the lake. The land they were fighting over wasn't just any property, it was a place loaded with history. It had been my grandmother's sanctuary, the only place in childhood where I'd felt safe. a tiny, weather-worn cottage on a wooded lot where she taught me to bake pies and how to identify birds and flowers. The place where she used to tell me quietly when no one else could hear, "You're stronger than they want you to believe." That house had sat empty since her death, a forgotten relic, while my parents argued about its future. And now, as I walked up the winding path to its front door, I realized that this house symbolized something bigger. It wasn't about land or money. It was about legacy, about whose version of history would survive. I spent the entire afternoon there quietly cleaning, clearing out cobwebs, opening windows to let in light and air that hadn't touched the place in years. And as I worked, an idea crystallized, dangerous, maybe even reckless, but exactly what this moment demanded. Instead of fighting their legal claim in court, I decided to claim the house publicly, not through litigation, but through community. The next morning, I reached out to the local historical society. I told them the story of my grandmother, a woman who quietly and without much recognition had preserved heirloom seeds, native plants, old family recipes, and traditions from the region. I offered to open the house as a community space, a small volunteer-run museum dedicated to local history and culinary heritage. The board of the Historical Society was thrilled. They agreed to list the property as a protected historical site, fast-tracking its registration to prevent any sudden attempts to bulldoze or sell it. By the end of the week, we had a formal agreement my grandmother's cottage would become a public trust. My parents couldn't touch it now, not without provoking a full-blown scandal, not without looking like villains in the eyes of a town that prided itself on preserving heritage. It was a dangerous move because I hadn't waited for the court's decision. But I knew my parents well enough to bet they would never publicly challenge a historical preservation project. Their reputation mattered more to them than anything else, even their resentment of me. But that was only half of the risk. There was still the matter of that trust, the money attached to the land. My parents had tried to reassign it to themselves, citing my supposed estrangement. But buried in the paperwork was a clause my lawyer Sandra found, a clause my grandmother herself had written decades ago, probably knowing exactly what kind of people my parents were, that any disputes over the trust must go to arbitration, not litigation. Arbitration meant fast proceedings, no drawn-out court battles, no endless delays. We filed immediately. And that meant, within weeks, my parents would have to sit in a small private room and explain to an independent arbitrator why their estranged daughter had kept meticulous records of every insult, every denial of financial help, every hostile comment they had made about Jonah over the years. It meant that their cruelty, usually confined to private snide remarks and casual dismissals, would be formally documented and judged by someone who wasn't already drinking their Kool-Aid. This part of the story might sound cold, but to me, it felt righteous. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to document everything, to lay it all out in the open, to force them to hear their own words read back to them without the protection of their excuses. Not to humiliate them publicly, but to create a record, a line in history they couldn't rewrite or gaslight away. The day we gathered in that small arbitration room, it was almost surreal. My parents sat on one side of the polished oak table, their lawyer looking smug but nervous. Sandra sat next to me, calm and methodical, her folders neatly labeled. I felt no fear, no rage, just clarity. When my parents tried to paint me as unstable, Sandra quietly handed the arbitrator copies of text messages, recordings, and letters, cold, clear evidence of years of psychological manipulation. When they accused me of estrangement, I provided proof that I'd invited them to every one of Jonah's birthdays except the last, and that they had refused, mocked, or undermined each one. When they claimed they'd supported me financially, I showed receipts proving every dollar had been repaid, often with interest. By the end of the session, it was clear they had lost. The arbitrator ruled that the trust should remain intact, its original beneficiary, me, confirmed. But more than that, the ruling included a scathing statement that the pattern of emotional mistreatment demonstrated by Mr. and Mrs. Carter over many years provided ample justification for Ms. Carter's decision to protect her child from further exposure. That official sentence, felt like vindication. Not just a legal victory, but a symbolic one, written proof that I hadn't been crazy all these years, that my intuition had been right, that the harm I'd felt was real. When we walked out of the building that afternoon, Sandra smiled at me. Not the tight, professional smile of a lawyer collecting a fee, but a softer, knowing smile. "You did this," she said. "You didn't just win a case, you changed the story." And she was right. That was the point all along. I wasn't just fighting for property or money. I was fighting for the right to define my own story on my own terms without being silenced or rewritten by people who had never truly loved me for who I was. As Jonah and I moved into that little lake house a few weeks later, now legally protected as a historic site and a place of community, I felt something shift, not just in me, but in the way I related to the world. I stopped explaining, stopped apologizing, stopped justifying my choices to people who had never respected me. And yet, even then, I knew this wasn't the end, because people like my parents never truly disappear. Even when they lose, they linger in phone calls that go unanswered, in letters that arrive at awkward moments, in the occasional run-in at the grocery store where they pretend everything's fine, smile, a brittle smile, and ask, "How's Jonah doing these days?" as if nothing ever happened. But that didn't matter anymore. Their power was gone. Not because they'd surrendered it, but because I had finally learned to stop giving it to them. And just as I was settling into this new rhythm, this quieter, steadier life with Jonah, surrounded by a community that valued us for who we were, a new letter arrived. Not from my parents this time, from Vanessa. No return address, no explanation. Just my name scrawled on the envelope in her loopy handwriting. I held it for a long time before opening it, my heart steady, but my mind already preparing for whatever storm she might try to summon next. I didn't open Vanessa's letter immediately. It sat untouched on the kitchen counter for 3 days, right next to the bowl where Jonah kept his rock collection, the smooth stones he'd gathered from hikes around the lake, each one a small monument to the quiet life we were building together. Every time I passed it, I felt a knot of dread and curiosity twisting in my stomach. There was a part of me that didn't want to give her even this much attention, but another part, the part that had learned to stop flinching, needed to know. Needed to face whatever she was trying to send my way. Finally, late one night, after Jonah had fallen asleep, curled up in a blanket on the sofa, I opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, loopy but sharp, elegant but rushed. It began plainly enough, Emily. "I know you probably hate me more than you ever have, and honestly, I can't blame you anymore." That alone startled me. I read on quickly, realizing this was not the rant I had expected. Instead, Vanessa confessed. She admitted that the dog food cake had never really been about Jonah. It was about punishing me for always getting away in her eyes. She revealed that even as a child, she had been jealous not of my life, but of my freedom, my refusal to fall in line with our parents' expectations. She described it like this: "I knew Dad respected me more, but you carried something I couldn't fake. I copied their cruelty because it felt like the only way to matter." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was more honesty than I'd ever gotten from her. She ended the letter with a line that stayed with me. "You can burn this, ignore it, whatever. I just needed you to know I see it now. I really do. I'm leaving this place for good." That sentence unsettled me in a way nothing else had. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, not trying to repair anything. It sounded final. And while I didn't owe her anything, the sister in me, the one buried under all that anger, felt a flicker of worry. The next day, I found myself driving almost without thinking to the address on the envelope's postmark, a small rented apartment on the edge of town. The curtains were drawn. No car in the driveway. I didn't knock, didn't call. I just sat there watching the wind rustle an overgrown hedge in the yard, realizing that some endings don't come with a confrontation or a resolution. Some endings are just quiet. But that drive forced me to reflect on something deeper. I had spent so much energy fighting to free myself from my family's grip, I hadn't asked what freedom actually meant. Was it just about cutting ties, winning legal battles, claiming property? Or was it something more intimate, a reclaiming of myself as a whole person, scars and all? That question stayed with me when I returned to the lake house. Jonah was sitting at the kitchen table with Miss Helen, who had become something of a surrogate grandmother to him in the months since the bakery party. She was teaching him how to braid bread, her flour-dusted hands guiding his small fingers gently. When she saw me standing there, lost in thought, she simply smiled. "This house," she said quietly, "needed a child's laughter again. And you needed somewhere that let you breathe." That was the symbol I hadn't fully appreciated yet. The lake house wasn't just a place of refuge. It was a space where the toxic inheritance of my family's bitterness had finally been transformed into something good, something healing. But even in this piece, the real twist was still waiting. The very next morning, as I walked Jonah to school, I spotted my father's car parked discreetly a block away. He didn't approach, just sat there, engine running, staring as we passed. I pretended not to notice, but my pulse quickened. It wasn't coincidence. My parents were too proud for drive-by nostalgia. This was reconnaissance. A reminder that they still believed they had a stake in my life, a right to observe, to linger in the background like ghosts I hadn't fully exorcised. That evening, another envelope arrived. This time formal again, but not from a lawyer, directly from my parents. Inside was a single typed letter. No warm greetings, no handwritten notes. Just a declaration they intended to contest the designation of the lake house as a historical property. They claimed family heritage as justification that it was an unfair seizure of ancestral land by a daughter who had severed all meaningful ties with her bloodline. The gall of it stunned me, but not enough to shake me. The underlying message was obvious. They couldn't stand the idea that I had taken something they believed should belong to them, even if they never truly valued it. It wasn't about the house, it was about control. For a moment, I wondered if I should fight this latest attack, directly call Sandra, launch another formal defense. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say as she kneaded dough at the old kitchen counter. Sometimes the strongest defense is living your life so fully your enemies have no air left to breathe around you. So instead of sending a response, I called Miss Helen and asked if she would help me organize something we had never done before, a public open house. A celebration of the cottage's new status, not as a family heirloom to be hoarded or fought over, but as a gift to the town, a symbol of renewal. We spent the next week preparing. Jonah helped paint signs, Miss Helen baked trays of pastries, and my neighbors donated flowers and time. By Saturday, the property was alive with color and music. The townspeople came in droves. Young families, older couples who remembered my grandmother fondly. Former classmates of mine who had drifted away but returned out of curiosity and goodwill. They didn't come to mourn a family legacy, they came to claim a shared one. Standing on the porch that afternoon, watching Jonah chase other children through the garden where I once played alone, I felt the deepest peace I'd ever known. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't victory over my parents or Vanessa. This was healing, pure and simple. I didn't need to win every battle anymore. I just needed to live. And yet, as the sun dipped low and the crowd thinned, a final visitor arrived. My mother. She stood at the gate in a tailored coat, pearl earrings glinting in the last rays of light, her posture as stiff and composed as ever. We locked eyes across the yard, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but cutting, just loud enough for me to hear. This was supposed to be ours. I didn't respond. I just turned, bent down to pick up a stray flower Jonah had dropped, and smiled, not at her, but at the life around me. She waited another beat, then left without another word. The silence she left behind wasn't heavy. It was clarifying. I understood in that instant that my family's grasp on me was truly over. Not because they had given up, but because I no longer needed them to release me. I had released myself. And later that night, as Jonah fell asleep beside me in his small bed upstairs, I opened Vanessa's letter one more time, rereading her final sentence. I'm leaving this place for good. I realized she had done what the rest of them never could. She left. She saw herself clearly, even if too late, and stepped away from the toxic inheritance our parents had passed down. In a strange way, I was grateful. She had handed me a final gift, permission to let go completely. And just as I thought the chapter was closing, my phone vibrated quietly on the nightstand. A message from a name I hadn't seen in years. Chris, Vanessa's ex-fiancé, the one she'd left during chemo. His message was brief but electric, with possibility. Emily, heard about the open house. There's something you should know about Vanessa. Something she never told anyone. Can we meet? Chris's text sat on my phone screen for hours before I answered. It felt like a trap and a key at the same time, a doorway back into Vanessa's orbit when I thought I had finally stepped out. But the phrasing, "there's something you should know," echoed in my mind. I could have ignored it, blocked the number, moved on. Yet I didn't. There was something unfinished between me and Vanessa that wouldn't leave me alone. So I agreed to meet him. We chose a little coffee shop on the edge of town, the kind with old wooden floors and mismatched chairs where no one eavesdropped and no one cared what your history was. Chris was already seated when I arrived, a worn cap pulled low over his eyes, fingers tapping nervously on the handle of his mug. He looked thinner than I remembered from the photos Vanessa had posted during their engagement, the carefully curated images of luxury weekends and perfect smiles. Life had clearly battered him since then. When he looked up, his expression wasn't bitter or resentful. It was tired. Deep down in his bones, tired. He offered a weak smile, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Emily, thanks for coming." The first thing he did was apologize, not for Vanessa's behavior, but for taking so long to reach out. He said he'd been watching from a distance as things fell apart for her, and that when he heard about the open house at the lake house, he realized it was time to share what he knew. Then he told me the part of Vanessa's story I hadn't known, the version she kept hidden even from herself. According to Chris, Vanessa hadn't simply fled town because her engagement collapsed or because her scams were exposed. She'd been running from something much older, something that even predated her cruelty toward me and Jonah. Vanessa had grown up trapped in the same toxic household I did, but she experienced it differently. Where I fought, she absorbed. Where I escaped, she performed. She became the golden child by design, yes, but at a cost I hadn't fully seen. Chris told me about the panic attacks Vanessa suffered privately, the sleepless nights, the way she obsessed over her image, not out of arrogance, but fear. Fear that if she slipped even once, the love she craved would evaporate. And then came the final twist. Vanessa hadn't just been cruel, she'd been sick. Diagnosed quietly, secretly, with bipolar disorder years ago. A diagnosis she never shared with our family because she knew exactly what they would do: dismiss, blame, mock. It didn't excuse what she did, not by a mile, but it complicated it. Chris slid a manila envelope across the table to me. Inside were medical records, notes from therapists, prescriptions, a short letter Vanessa had written to him but never sent. The letter was brief but raw. She wrote, "I know how this ends. I just don't know how to stop being this way. Emily won't believe me. She shouldn't." That line gutted me in ways I couldn't articulate. Vanessa wasn't asking for forgiveness in that letter either. She was simply naming her truth in private too late. I didn't say much to Chris after that. We sat there in mutual understanding, two people battered by the same woman in different ways. Before he left, he added one more thing. She disappeared to Arizona. I don't know where exactly, but you deserved to know she tried. Before she left for good, she really did try to face it. Driving home, the envelope sat in the passenger seat like an accusation and an apology combined. And I realized the battle I thought I had won wasn't over at all. It had simply shifted. For years, I'd fought my family's toxic legacy. I'd thought winning meant cutting them off, establishing firm boundaries, holding them accountable, protecting Jonah at all costs. But there was a deeper battle I hadn't acknowledged, the one inside me. The part that still craved understanding, even from people who didn't deserve it. That night, I sat on the back porch of the lake house, Jonah asleep upstairs. Miss Helen's old wind chimes clinking softly in the breeze, and I let myself feel what I hadn't dared to before grief. Grief for the sister I never really had. Grief for the childhood we both endured. Grief for the fact that Vanessa, in all her cruelty, was as much a product of our parents' dysfunction as I was. It didn't absolve her. Nothing could. But it clarified the stakes of the life I was building now. That clarity became my next act of defiance. I chose consciously and fully to stop waiting for apologies that would never come, to stop searching the mail for one more letter, one more explanation. I chose to seal the past exactly where it belonged. Yet even in that moment of peace, the universe delivered one last twist. Just as I tucked the envelope of medical records into a locked drawer, the same drawer where I kept copies of Vanessa's forged loan documents, family letters, and Jonah's birth certificate, a knock sounded at the front door. Late. Too late for casual visits. When I opened it, I froze. Standing there wasn't my mother or my father. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Natalie, Vanessa's old friend, and the one person from my former family circle who had never joined in their cruelty. She looked exhausted. Her makeup smudged her expression grim but gentle. "Emily," she said softly, "I know you're probably done with all of this, but there's something you need to see. It's about your parents." The way she said it made my stomach twist all over again. A new door had just opened, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to step through. When Natalie appeared at my door, part of me wanted to pretend I didn't see her standing there. The truth is, I was tired. Tired of old ghosts showing up unannounced. Tired of family drama wearing different masks, knocking on the peace I had fought tooth and nail to build. But something in Natalie's face, her vulnerability, her exhausted honesty cut through my hesitation. Without a word, I stepped aside and let her in. The air between us was heavy with unspoken history. She sat at the kitchen table, her coat still on her eyes, tracing the wooden grain of the table as if rehearsing what she'd come to say. Finally, she spoke. "Emily, I didn't know whether to tell you this, but your parents, they're not done." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Deep down, I had known they weren't done. My parents didn't let go. They circled, they waited, they found new ways to insert themselves where they weren't welcome. But hearing it out loud still sent a chill through me. Natalie reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound planner, a planner I recognized immediately. My mother's. She flipped it open and pointed to a page marked with names, dates, and what looked like a schedule of meetings with a lawyer, not their previous attorney, but someone new, discreet, well-connected. A post-it note was attached. On it, in my mother's tidy, precise handwriting, were the words, "Final strategy for reclaiming property, focus on Jonah's guardianship angle." I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Guardianship. They were planning to come after Jonah, not out of love or concern, but as leverage, as a tool to regain control, to force me back into their orbit. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. Natalie kept talking, explaining how she'd found the planner accidentally, how she overheard enough to realize this wasn't idle speculation, it was a plan in motion. She looked at me, then her eyes filled with regret. "I can't undo what they've done," she said softly. "But I couldn't just stand by. You deserve to know." Her visit forced me to face an uncomfortable truth my parents would never stop. Because this wasn't about family to them, it was about power, image, control. And if they were willing to weaponize my child to get it, then no peace treaty would ever hold. That night, I sat at the lake house window, staring out at the moonlit water, trying to find clarity. The house itself felt like a character in this saga, now a symbol of what I'd reclaimed, yes, but also a fragile sanctuary still under siege. And that's when I made the riskiest decision of all. Instead of waiting for the next legal maneuver, instead of preparing for the fight they were clearly orchestrating, I decided to go public. The next morning, I contacted a local journalist. Not a tabloid chaser, but a woman named April who had built a reputation on quiet, human interest stories, pieces about community, legacy healing. I invited her to the lake house and laid out everything. The history of my parents' manipulation, the incident with Jonah's birthday, the fraud, Vanessa's collapse, and now their latest attempt to claim guardianship of a child they had treated as a disposable prop. It was a calculated risk. Families like mine thrived in silence and keeping everything private so they could maintain an outward image of perfection. By telling my story, I wasn't just fighting back. I was exposing the cultural myth my parents clung to, the belief that family ties, no matter how toxic, should always be preserved and protected from outside scrutiny. April listened without interrupting her notepad filling with small, precise notes. When I finished, she simply nodded. "I think a lot of people will relate to this more than you know," she said. Her article ran 2 weeks later. It wasn't sensationalized. It was thoughtful, careful, but devastating in its honesty. The headline was simple but perfect. Reclaiming Peace, One Woman's Fight for Her Son and Her Story. Within days, the calls began, not from my parents, but from neighbors, old acquaintances, even strangers who saw themselves reflected in my words. Messages of support, stories of their own family betrayals, quiet thanks for saying what they hadn't dared to say. The most striking thing was how many people mentioned that line from my interview. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let your child inherit your trauma. It was a public act of closure. And yet even then, the story wasn't quite over. Because 2 days after the article ran, a letter arrived, this time hand-delivered by Natalie herself. No envelope, just folded paper. Inside was a single sentence written in my father's unmistakable script: "You win this time. But you'll regret teaching Jonah to hate us." No signature, no explanation. It was meant as a threat. But to me, it felt like confirmation. Confirmation that they had lost, not because I had silenced them, but because they had finally exhausted every weapon they had, and I was still standing. Stronger, clearer, unafraid. In that moment, I knew I didn't need to answer their letter. Didn't need to respond legally or emotionally. They could live in whatever bitterness they chose. It no longer mattered. The lake house had transformed completely now. Where it had once symbolized refuge, then battleground, then legacy, it now stood as a monument to survival. A space where Jonah's laughter rang freely, where I could bake cakes without fear of someone smirking over my shoulder, where guests felt warmth and welcome, not judgment. But the most symbolic act was the one I chose next. That evening, Jonah and I took a small rowboat out onto the lake. We carried with us a sealed glass jar filled with slips of paper notes I had written over the past year. Each note was a memory I no longer needed harsh words from my parents, insults from Vanessa, shame that had never belonged to me. In the center of the lake, under a soft pink sky, I let Jonah unscrew the jar and tip it gently into the water. The papers unfurled as they sank, disappearing into the depths. Jonah looked up at me, his eyes full of curiosity. "Mom, why did we do that?" I smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. Because sometimes, I told him gently, the best way to win is to let go. That was the real ending, not revenge, not even justice in the traditional sense, just release. And as we rowed back to shore, I felt something profound: peace that didn't depend on anyone else's apology. Peace that didn't require permission or validation. A peace that belonged to me, finally, fully, completely. As I tucked Jonah into bed that night, he reached out and took my hand. "I love our house," he whispered. "And I love our life." I kissed his forehead. "Me too, kiddo. Me too." But even then, as I turned out the light, I understood that this wasn't the kind of peace that meant nothing would ever go wrong again. Life would keep delivering surprises, challenges, maybe even betrayals. But I was ready for them now. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was truly living. Story 2. I never thought I'd be the guy crouched behind a pillar in the hotel lobby watching my brother's reflection hit the marble floor. My name is Ethan Parker. I'm 33, and this is the moment I realized my family's perfect facade was about to shatter for good. I grew up in Cedar Grove, a tidy suburb of Austin, Texas. Our block had lawns that looked like golf greens and houses with matching paint schemes. Dad owned a boutique real estate firm. He sold dream homes by day and coached Caleb's Little League team by night. Mom ran an interior design studio from our upstairs office. She believed in symmetry and spotless cushions and needle-sharp pleats. And then there was Caleb, 3 years younger than me, 30 years old now. Dad's golden boy. The kid with the perfect grades, the captain's armband, the deacon's badge. I still remember the day they brought him home from the hospital. I was 5. In that instant, everyone forgot I existed. From then on, everything revolved around Caleb. His school projects, his soccer matches, his future. I was the afterthought, the space filler between his milestones. It stung, but I learned to live in the margins. Yet beneath his polished smile, Caleb harbored an icy darkness. He broke my telescope in 6th grade because I wouldn't lend it. When I was 10, he fed my pet goldfish chocolate knowing it would kill her. I found her floating at dawn. Mom sighed, patted my shoulder, and said, "He didn't know better." Then she took him shopping for a new console, no questions asked. I bottled the hurt. I told myself it was just brotherly jealousy. But the warning signs were all around me. Unexplained bruises on my sketches, whispers of Ethan's being dramatic, and my parents' eyes darting away whenever I tried to speak up. Enter Isabella Grant, age 29. I met her at a downtown coffee shop while delivering blueprints to a client. She was on break from her job as a children's book editor, and we bonded over the latte art, a tiny fox stamped in foam. She laughed at all my jokes, even the terrible ones. She listened when I spoke, really listened. For the first time, I felt seen. I kept Isabella hidden from my family for 3 months. Every text message between us was coded. I refused to bring her to our annual holiday party, too risky. When I finally confessed why, she stared at me with wide, concerned eyes. "Maybe he's changed," she said softly. "We're adults now." I hated that she still hoped, but something in her courage made me want to believe too. So against my better judgment, I invited her to my family's spring anniversary dinner, an event my parents dubbed our showcase. Before that night, Aunt Marta pulled me aside. She's my mother's older sister, retired from corporate law. Few people know Marta exists, but she's my secret ally. Over turquoise tea, she slid a slim journal across the table. "You'll want to record everything," she whispered. "Dates, times, words. No detail is too small. If he tries anything, you'll need proof." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Marta's eyes were serious, almost haunted. She added I couldn't intervene back then. "But I'll stand with you now." I packed that journal into my jacket pocket. In my car, I texted my best friend Marcus Chen heads up. "I'm bringing her. Wish me luck." A minute later, his reply blinked in, "Stay sharp. I've got your back. I've got your..." The day of the dinner, I felt like a soldier marching into a trap. Isabella held my hand as we drove to the Parker residence. Her squeeze was steady. She whispered, "I'm here because I trust you." We pulled into the circular driveway. Dad's Tesla and Caleb's black coupe sat side by side. I caught Uncle Marcus's nod from behind the tinted SUV. He'd parked nearby on standby. Mom greeted us at the front door with her practiced warmth. Her designer dress was flawless. She peered at Isabella's simple navy sheath and said, "You're a breath of fresh air." Her smile was tight. Still, I forced my own grin. Inside the foyer smelled of jasmine and sandalwood. Portraits of Caleb in college cap and gown lined the walls. There wasn't a single photo of me, just empty frames where my childhood should have been. Caleb appeared at the top of the staircase. His grin was blinding. He wrapped his arm around Isabella's shoulders for the first time. I felt a twist in my gut. He lingered too close. Isabella tensed. "Isn't this our new family portrait?" he asked, voice syrupy. I cleared my throat. "Give us a minute," I muttered. I guided Isabella toward the living room. Caleb's laugh followed us sharp as broken glass. As we settled on the sofa, Aunt Marta slipped me a discreet thumbs up. I opened my journal and wrote April 12th, 7:15 p.m. Caleb cornered Isabella at the staircase. He laughed when she tried to move away. Dinner was a parade of backhanded compliments. Dad bragged about Caleb's latest sales figure. Mom asked Isabella, "So Ethan's busy. Do you think he'll share more of his life?" Each question coated with a sugary sting. Yet Isabella stayed poised. She sipped her water, met Mom's gaze, and said, "Ethan's life is wonderful," as if she was reading from a perfect script. My chest ached with gratitude. After salad, Caleb cooked up an old story about my university days embellished to make me look foolish. I caught Isabella's eye. She gave me a small, understanding nod. Later, as the table cleared for dessert, I slipped from the room to check on Marcus's car. He smiled and handed me a recording device. Just in case, he muttered. I slipped it into my pocket beside the journal. Returning, I found Isabella pale but determined. She mouthed, "I'm okay." I sank beside her and whispered, "We'll get through this." Mom brought out a cherry almond tart. Caleb leaned in and offered Isabella a forkful uninvited. She pulled back. His grin faltered for a split second before he shrugged and offered it to me. I thought of Marta's advice record everything. I unclenched my jaw and reached for the device. In that moment, I realized the extent of what I was up against. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was a calculated campaign. And the worst was yet to come. Ethan's pulse hammered in my ears as we stepped out into the warm spring night. Isabella's hand still clutched in mine like an anchor. The journal and recorder nestled against my chest felt heavier than any weapon silent witnesses to the poison my family had spread. Every street lamp flicker reminded me of my father's cold smile, every whisper of wind the promise of my brother's next move. I fought the instinct to throw the devices away, erase the evidence, save myself the pain. But Marta's warning echoed, "No detail is too small. If I let go now, I'd betray Isabella and my own truth." Yet exposing my family meant tearing down the house I grew up in, shattering the tidy world Mom and Dad had built. I realized then that inner strength wasn't about hiding scars, it was about showing them proud and raw like battle flags. I squeezed Isabella's hand and whispered, "We keep this." She nodded, tears shining in the glare of a lone street lamp as though she understood the war we'd just signed up for. By the next morning, the first betrayal surfaced. Isabella's phone buzzed with a blocked number, a single photo of her silhouette in scrubs taken through a dusty windshield. No words, just an accusation of intrusion. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through last night's recordings, searching for clues. In the tape, I heard Caleb's practiced laugh in the background of our dinner conversation, mingling with Dad's harmless teasing. But the photo placed him closer to her life than I'd feared. I felt a surge of rage, and the sharp clarity that fear alone wouldn't save her action would. Symbolically, I pictured the recording device as a cracked mirror. It reflected truth, but fractured the image of who my family thought they were. I had to decide go to the police and risk their disbelief, or confront Caleb myself and risk everything. My breath caught at the thought that either choice could blow apart the last ties to my childhood. I chose confrontation. That afternoon, I slipped away from my construction site, the half-built condo looming behind me like a monument to broken promises. I called Caleb, voice steady but carrying a razor's edge. "Meet me at Mercer's Pond in an hour." The pond was where we'd fished as kids baited hooks and childhood hopes drifting on the water. Now it would be our battlefield. When he arrived, he carried that same perfect mask, oblivious to what I held: the recorder, the journal, the photo. I laid them on the weathered bench and watched his smile falter. "You're bluffing," he sneered. But when I played the tape of his voice around Isabella, his laughter cut out, replaced by a nervous shuffle. That's when the real twist hit. A police cruiser rolled by, lights off, Mom behind the wheel. She stepped out, arms crossed, eyes cold. She told me calmly that evidence wasn't enough, that family matters belonged at home, not in court. The broken watch I pulled from my pocket, a gift from Dad on my 13th birthday, fell to the ground, its cracked face a testament to time lost. As I bent to pick it up, Caleb slipped away into the shadows, and Mom's final words trailed after him. "This stops now, Ethan." Something in me ignited. The old me would have retreated, taken Mom's decree as gospel. But now I felt the weight of every injustice I'd swallowed. I raised my head, the reflection of streetlights dancing off the pond's ripples like a call to arms. If family loyalty meant silencing truth, I refused. I called Aunt Marta from behind the trees, her calm voice grounding me. "Check your email," she said. On my phone, a secure message from Marcus, photos of Tyler circling Isabella's apartment, timestamps, license plates. Marta had forwarded it to a trusted reporter at the Cedar Grove Chronicle, a woman who believed in real stories over neat headlines. Symbolically, I saw the pond's surface crack as I sent the email, truth breaking through the lies. But I knew unleashing a local scandal risked our privacy, our safety. As the email whoosh faded, I felt an exhilaration and dread coiling in my chest, because once I hit send, I couldn't unring the bell. That evening, the Chronicle published a front-page exposé, "Local Heir Major League Predator." They ran Caleb's photo next to Isabella's shadowed scrub silhouette and quoted my journal entries. The town buzzed, gossip circling faster than wildfire. My phone lit up with messages from former neighbors, friends, classmates, some shocked, some disbelieving, some eager to question their own memories. Mom's phone calls became frantic. "You betrayed us," she hissed over and over. Dad warned of lawsuits and ruined reputations. But in the roar of public scrutiny, I felt something unexpected: liberation. I wasn't alone anymore. People I didn't know emailed offering support for Isabella, urging her to press charges. Social beliefs, loyalty to blood over truth, were shifting as neighbors faced their own demons. Yet the victory tasted bittersweet. Isabella sat beside me at the kitchen table, eyes raw, asking softly, "Was that too much?" And I realized our world had changed irrevocably. Now, as night fell on Cedar Grove, I stand on my porch with Isabella leaning into me, the air humming with distant sirens and whispered rumors. A hard line has been drawn. We are either heroes or villains. Caleb's silence roars in the empty streets, a promise of retribution. The history of lies can't be undone, but the future is an open road. We'll walk together undaunted, our voices finally unchained. I catch Isabella's gaze and feel the calm before the next storm coming tomorrow. Caleb's lawyers will strike back, and my parents will tighten their grip. But for the first time, I know I will stand my ground, whatever the cost. I woke up to the glow of my phone, endless news alerts framing every corner of the screen. Local scions, dark secret exposed real estate prints, or predator comments scrolled by like a river of teeth. Some cheered me on. Others tore at Isabella's reputation, dredging up rumors that made my blood run cold. A few even snuck in memories of my own childhood, mocking my faded high school photos as if I'd never deserved dignity. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat bigger than the coffee cup I gripped. Just hours ago, I'd believed shining truth on darkness would free us. Instead, it felt like we'd unleashed a pack of wolves. Across the tiny kitchen, Isabella sat hunched over her laptop, eyes rimmed red, reading every fresh insult. The morning sun slipped through blinds, casting striped shadows on her face like prison bars. I poured 2 mugs of coffee and set one in front of her, trying to anchor us both. My hands shook despite the dam of resolve I'd built. Promising safety felt hollow. I knew better now. All we had was forward motion. I slid into the chair opposite her, heart thudding against ribs. "We're in this together," I said, voice low but firm. She gave me a small nod, though tears still glistened on her lashes, as she scrolled to another thread, dredging up secondhand gossip from 10 years ago. I realized that dragging our story into the daylight was just the opening salvo in a war we'd barely begun. The first blow came from an unexpected quarter, a crisp letter on embossed stationery delivered by a stone-faced process server who looked at me with nothing but pity. The firm represented the Parker family, dad's name printed at the bottom in looped signature. They accused me of reckless defamation, demanded every recording journal entry, even my phone, and insisted on a public apology. "Family matters," the letter said, "are best resolved in private." The ledger paper felt cold in my palm like a judge's gavel waiting to fall. I paced our living room, tracing every crack in the plaster, each one a hidden scar from years of silenced hurt. Now they wanted to seal me up again under legal threat instead of listening. Isabella watched from the couch, her posture slack with fear. "What will you do?" she whispered. My jaw clenched. Always the reasonable brother, I packaged certainty in even tones. But the letter laid down a gauntlet I couldn't ignore, comply and betray truth, or refuse and risk financial ruin. I remembered Aunt Marta's words about bravery being forged, not gifted. I slipped the recordings into a secure cloud vault behind a new password and drafted my reply, no retraction, no apology. My finger hovered above send, heart pounding like a war drum, as though clicking would split my life in two. 2 days later, the lawsuit materialized, summons and motions served atop a sheaf of legalese thicker than my last tax filing. My fingertips tingled as I read threats of injunctions and penalties that could bleed us dry. Yet I discovered an unexpected ally in the courthouse's victims advocacy office. I'd volunteered there after college, so I reached out. They connected me with Claire Jensen, a pro bono attorney whose calm confidence felt like a lighthouse in dense fog. Claire read my journal over coffee in her small office lined with battered case files. "We'll stand with you," she said, voice steady as steel. Meanwhile, Isabella's world unraveled. The hospital corridor that once felt like home became a gauntlet of stairs. Parents whispered about her public scandal. A supervisor warned she might lose her license if the rumors spread. Watching her strength falter ignited something in me, a feral need to protect her. I remembered the cracked mirror we once used to reflect truth's shards, and realized those shards could also form a shield. I ordered a dozen small hand mirrors, each inscribed with timestamps and quotes from my journal, and plastered them on our study wall like defiant trophies. Every reflection reminded us why we fought. Yet at night, their edges glinted like watchful eyes, reminding me that legal victory wasn't guaranteed. As the trial date loomed, I wondered if exposing my family's darkness would finally free us or bury us alive. On the eve of our first hearing, the world shrank to forms, affidavits, and whispered prayers. Clara, my childhood dog-eared comforter, tucked into a duffel bag, an anchor from simpler times. We bunked in an RV parked on Marcus's property, our safe house. Each morning, I watched Isabella at the tiny sink, her gentle hands washing chipped mugs as if tending to fragile patients. My reflection rippled in the window glass, a man rebuilt from fires of truth. Yet outside, Cedar Grove crackled with tension. Protesters wielding shame on Ethan signs clashed with supporters chanting "Protect Women." Social media split the town in two. Even the old belief that family blood ran thicker than water felt brittle now. Then came a surprise twist. Our judge ordered family mediation before trial, a last-ditch plea for reconciliation. My parents, buoyed by the hope of keeping secrets buried, agreed online. We sat in a sterile conference room, Mom in a blue silk scarf that caught the fluorescent glare, Dad's forehead creased with thinly veiled panic. Claire calm at my side, Marcus silent but ready. Their voices dripped with syrupy concern about healing the family. I opened the Cloud Vault link on my phone and placed it in front of them. "Everything's there," I said. Voice measured, but irrevocable. Their eyes flicked to the link as though it were a snake. The mediators exchanged glances. In the hollow silence, I saw our old world crack away. But the next move, my next word, would decide whether those cracks would heal or swallow us whole. I felt the room tilt when I slid my phone across the mediation table, the cloud link glowing like a dare. Mom's perfectly manicured nails hovered over it, as if the slightest touch would unleash a curse. Dad's jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. The mediator, a woman in horn-rimmed glasses, cleared her throat. "Mr. Parker, are you prepared to discuss a path forward?" My heart hammered. I pictured every bruise, every shattered pet, every silent dinner where Mom and Dad chose perfect appearances over my pain. I drew in a slow breath, tasting the dust of old lies on my tongue. "There is no path forward without accountability," I said, voice steady but veined with anger. "You will apologize to Isabella publicly, seek professional family therapy, and acknowledge Caleb's pattern of harassment. Otherwise, we proceed to trial." Silence stretched. Mom's lips twitched the first crack in her porcelain mask. Dad's eyes flicked to Caleb, who sat stone-faced at the back, arms crossed, smug as ever. The mediator glanced between us, then sighed. "It seems we're at an impasse." As I stood, the chair scraped the floor like a starting pistol. I looked down at Isabella's hand in mine and felt the first real click of freedom and the promise of battle to come. Courtroom air smelled of stale coffee and tension. I sat beside Claire Jensen, her calm presence a shield against the storm outside. Reporters scribbled in the gallery, neighbors craning their necks as if we were performing some moral spectacle. The judge called the hearing to order, and we launched into our case. Aunt Marta testified first, her voice steady as she described the broken telescope and the poisoned goldfish details I'd recorded in that dog-eared journal. Marcus brought forward surveillance photos of Tyler lurking by Isabella's apartment, timestamps stamped like iron seals. But the real twist came when Caleb took the stand. He swaggered forward, that familiar, perfect smile plastered on. I braced for the usual denial, but instead, he flinched, and then in a crack of raw honesty, he spat, "Dad used to slap me when I cried about the pressure. He told me, boys don't get weak." The courtroom froze. Mom's eyes widened, Dad's face drained of color. Caleb's confession peeled back the veneer. The cycle of abuse ran deeper than I'd known. The jury scribbled furiously. I heard a mother gasp. Even the judge leaned forward, interest flashing in his eyes. In that moment, I realized the real enemy wasn't just my brother's charm, it was the family code of silence we all inherited. When the verdict came, it felt like lightning crackling through my chest. The judge granted a permanent restraining order against Caleb, dismissed the defamation suit, and awarded Isabella damages for emotional distress. He admonished my parents for enabling Caleb's behavior, ordering family counseling under court supervision. The gavel's echo seemed to shatter something glassy inside me. Outside, a cluster of supporters, strangers who believed our story, cheered softly like distant church bells. But as we stepped into the blinding sunlight, I saw the other side, neighbors whose eyes flashed with betrayal, trolls lining the courthouse steps with placards reading "Family above all." Social media exploded. Some hailed us as heroes. Others branded us traitors for airing dirty laundry. Standing there, with Isabella's hand in mine, I realized victory had a bitter aftertaste. Truth costs everything you thought you owned. We walked past Dad's empty SUV parked temporarily while he faced public disgrace, and I felt the weight of our new reality. The future stretched out like a cracked highway full of potholes we'd never imagined, but at least it was ours to travel. A year later, Isabella and I stand in our sun-drenched living room painting a mural of a lone fox leaping over a shattered mirror. The fox, cunning and brave, symbolizes our courage to face predators. The broken mirror shards realigned into something new marks our journey from lies to light. Our unborn daughter kicks in the quiet hush of my shoulder, and I feel her small fists echo our own resolve. We've rebuilt a life far from Cedar Grove's manicured lawns. I design eco-friendly townhomes. She runs a literacy program for kids, and our evenings end with laughter instead of dread. Yet every so often, I catch myself glancing at the calendar. Today's date, circled in red, is Caleb's parole hearing. Despite the restraint order, I know the system's cracks can widen, letting his darkness seep through. I tuck the old journal into a drawer labeled Lessons, its spine cracked but intact, and close it with a soft click. As evening light filters through the window, casting long shadows on our painted walls, I wrap an arm around Isabella. We share a quiet promise: no matter what comes next, We've already proven that broken things can become whole. But somewhere beneath that lullaby calm, I feel the faint tremor of a new storm stirring.